Alrighty, y'all. How you going? It's been a little bit, huh? I took a little break. We have some really cool videos coming up from our little trip to Nashville, Tennessee, having to do with Europe and having to do with Australia and stuff. But look, we are getting into Reddit right now. Maps that are straight up interesting from down under. Let's take a look. These are always fun. This is from 3 years ago, actually. This is a 3D visualization of the fires in Australia made from NASA satellite data. These are all areas that have been affected, but not all areas that are still burning. So if you look at this, whoa, that is crazy. Obviously, the Australian fires have been insane, have been wicked, especially 3 years ago, right? And just look at that. I mean, this is a big place, and that is a very frightening footprint, if I'm being quite honest. And it seemed to hit everywhere. That's what's weird. It's like all along the East Coast. It's way up north, even in the center here and out west. I mean, it's like nowhere seemed safe from this. Now, this is a fun map. I've done, or seen rather, maps of Australia over North America before. This one actually has some cities lined up here. So for me, I could actually see how far away stuff is. For example, I know it's funny with tourists, a lot of people don't know how big Australia is. So they think they're going to see like maybe Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne in a day or two. And then, local Australians have to tell them like, oh, you're going to need a lot more time than that. They're really far away. Well, that's not really a problem usually with Americans if they use their head, because our country is equally as big. Like, for example, Brisbane to Sydney, not terribly far. Granted, it would be a pretty far drive, and it's going to take a long time. You're going to have to drive all day or maybe split it into 2 days, right? But it's really no different than going from, the coast of North Carolina down to northern Florida. I mean, that's not terrible for at least American standards. I do have to say how freakishly tall Australia is, though, because if we consider Hobart is like down here in Cancun, while being in northern Queensland would be the equivalent just size-wise, remember, not climate-wise or any of that, but size-wise, it would be like being well into Canada. I mean, we're way up in Canada here and way down in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico down here. That is insane. That shows how big Australia is. Definitely much taller than the lower 48, but not quite as wide. Interesting note that Perth to Brisbane, for example, would be like going from Los Angeles all the way over here to the East Coast. Now, here's a less likely comparison, but a really interesting one. Let me explain. This is Australia and Brazil compared. And what's crazy is you'll see Brazil's also very, very big. I'm not sure if it's bigger than the United States or about the same, but it's close. And I believe it might be technically bigger. It is actually 3.2 million square miles for Brazil and 2.9, just a tear under 3 for Australia. So Brazil's slightly bigger, but here's the crazy thing. Brazil has 200 million people, where Australia only has 23.2. As of this post, I've heard it's usually 24, 25 million. Either way, what's crazy is look at the population density. Basically, the equivalent Australia population lives in this red area. So like all of the red would be the amount of Australians total, just that tiny bit, and then it wouldn't even fill up Brazil at all. Like, that's the weird part. Australia is such a big place, but has barely any population. I still can't believe it. It's absolutely wild to me. At the same time, it's pretty cool, actually. Get a lot of awesome places to yourself. This is hilarious. This is a habitability map of Australia from 1946. So this tells it in simple terms here. Coal fields are shown in black. And then we just have it broken down here. We got good agricultural and pastoral lands along the coast here. We have fair agricultural lands a little further inland. Then we have grazy lands among a lot of the central and western part. And then, of course, over here it gets just flat sparse. And then you have areas in here in the true inland, crazy, raw outback that are just, useless. This would be crazy if it was real. This is a satellite map based on Thomas Maslin's map from his 1833 book, The Friend of Australia, where he argued the case for there being a huge river delta in the Australian continent. And if we take a closer look, I tell you what, compared to the last map we just looked at, I think it would have changed and made a lot of this much more habitable. As we also mentioned that whenever you see these colored maps like this, literally just the edges, just the coast of Australia have some greenery to them. And then it's out of all the continents, you have the biggest like orange and yellowish red desert looking part in the center. It dominates almost the whole continent, right? It appears to be very dry, very inhabitable, and of course, very hard for agriculture. Look at how much green is on this one because of this water, right? You only have a little bit of dry desert area over here in Western Australia and just a little bit on the southern half of the continent. This would be so much more lush and really bump up the agriculture. And who knows, it would have totally played out differently all the way back to probably Aboriginal communities and further population among the years. I'm assuming it would maybe be more if this was the case. I don't know. Pretty crazy to think about, right? This is a drive around the Australia coastline. Well, almost coastline. And they say that because you can see that follows the coastline around about 80 or 90% of the country, except up here, which that's not really big. This is what I'm talking about, this peninsula, right? This is part of Queensland, of course, and it juts way up there. I mean, it goes pretty far. I always think of this as kind of like Florida here, where you have Florida jutting way out into the ocean and, being a peninsula as well. And of course, being very different than a lot of the country, being very tropical, surrounded by water. So it feels a lot different. And I think this is like the same effect. I believe this is very tropical as well, being a similar type deal with the peninsula, the tropical climate, kind of like sort of a Florida in Australia when we're talking about this part. But what's weird is the road. I've seen maps like this where the road just cuts across here. So what is the deal? Can you go up here? If not, like if you wanted to do a coastal drive, which would be a crazy journey, why can't you hug all this peninsula and come back down? Is it totally empty? Does anyone want to weigh in on it? I know Cairns is supposed to be a beautiful place and, somewhat populated, has a decent amount of tourism, I bet. But it seems to be the only, I guess you could say, major or decently developed area. And then up here is always like a bunch of unmarked nothing. Is it really empty up there? I always thought it was weird that part of the coastline just gets skipped when it comes to these highways and these routes. Now, of course, we all know Google Earth, Google Maps, right? And on Google Earth, you can pull up Street View and, of course, zoom way down to the ground and see what it's like on the street. Well, what's crazy is a lot of countries have some pretty impressive amount of Google Street View ability, and somewhere as big as Australia, I mean, of course, you have it around the population centers, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, that type of deal. You have some good amount of Street View, but then as the further inland you go, other than this major highway here, or this route at least right through the middle, going north-south, there is like nothing at all. Like you can't see Street View anywhere. Now, granted, I know there's ways you could actually drive up in these areas, but they're just not documented on Street View. And I always think that is kind of interesting. Also kind of weird how they have like these random ones over here, like this Street View right here in the middle of Queensland. That's not really connected to anything. And then like some of these, like in Western Australia, they came all the way out here and just stopped and turned around. Like, is that what happened? I don't know. It's pretty interesting to see that much gap and that much emptiness on Street View in such a famous and developed country. Now, I absolutely love this because I love weather. I love learning about biomes and plants and animals and just stuff like this. It's so interesting. Now, this is a vegetation/biome analog of Australia, or how other places in the world would fit in Australia. So this makes it a little easier to understand for maybe people around the world. So here it is. Like, for example, I have experience with, I've spent a lot of time in the Chihuahuan Desert in New Mexico and West Texas, and then it bleeds into Arizona. And then when you get towards central Arizona, it becomes the Sonoran Desert, which is a little more lush, a little more hot usually, even though they're both very, very hot. And then, of course, you have the Mojave Desert that basically is most of California and then bleeds into a little bit of Nevada. And that's what I'll start out with. Like, as you can see, the Sonoran Desert way in the middle of Australia here, so like Alice Springs and most of the Northern Territory, and I can see that, right? Even the outback here in Queensland would fit into the Sonoran Desert. Then we have like the really hot part, so like the Mojave is really hot and dry, and so like think Las Vegas or Death Valley, California, that type of deal. That's way in here. You got to be in the northern corner of South Australia. It must be really dry there and really intensely hot. Then, of course, the Chihuahuan Desert is very hot as well. Lots of mountains, lots of high desert, lots of very interesting vegetation. And that's over here just south of that. As well as we have like Phoenix, Arizona would be somewhere in here. New Mexico, just maybe a little better weather, a little more on the mild side, but drier as well. That would be somewhere around around the border of South Australia and Western Australia. Very interesting to see that. Then, of course, down here, Perth and the coast here, you have an awesome Mediterranean climate, South Italy, Malta. So I'm assuming this weather's really, really nice, really desirable, and why there is population centers there. Then up here, you have these wild kind of southeastern India and Somalia type climates up here. And like I said, Florida is right, like part of the Caribbean. You have that kind of tropical weather, and you're very close proximity to countries in the Caribbean. So as I said earlier, this peninsula would fall under that. That's pretty cool, as well as kind of a Kenya, Central Eastern Africa type deal. And then if we get into the really populated areas, Sydney, I can picture being like kind of like Turkey or maybe even Southern California. That makes sense, right? Southern coastal California is very wet in the winter, very dry the rest of the year, and usually pretty moderate temperatures, never too hot, never too cold. And then even greener down here, so somewhere like San Jose, San Francisco, way up in Northern California, that would be like the Melbourne area, Mediterranean, even like Greece. Adelaide actually being compared to LA and San Diego. Very interesting. And then, of course, you have France and Northern Italy, Northern California. That's kind of like what Tasmania is like. I don't know. This is very interesting to me when we're talking about the climate, the vegetation type deal. What do you think? Is this somewhat accurate in your opinion? I think it's pretty cool to see, and I like this. This is like a fun map for me. This one's pretty funny. We all know Australia has the worst internet, right? Well, I don't know about that, but it's definitely like a meme, definitely a joke that is pretty commonly thought. Well, this is countries with better internet than Australia, and countries with worst internet, than Australia. Countries that are better internet have green, and then, of course, countries with worse are red, and then blue, Australia. So New Zealand coming in with better internet, as well as most of South Asia, actually all of Asia, mostly, as well as a lot of Western Europe, with the exception of some countries. I mean, like, for example, Italy, I guess they have worse internet than Australia. Africa, a little bit of both. Some randoms in there, like Madagascar has better internet. I guess Saudi Arabia has better internet. And then, of course, mostly all of North America, at least the big countries like, of course, Canada, United States, and Mexico coming in with better internet. Some of the Caribbean as well. And South America, pretty mixed bag. But some notable ones like Brazil and, of course, Chile coming in with better internet. Not sure how accurate this is or how it's measured, but it's pretty fun to entertain, at least. It's kind of interesting. This is a pretty weird map. Not really sure how to interpret this, but I guess it's millionaire migration. Which countries are gaining millionaires, which countries are losing millionaires? Like Canada, the U.S., they're gaining some millionaires. I guess that's not surprising. A lot of Europe is losing millionaires, with the exception of countries like maybe Portugal and Switzerland. We have Mexico and Brazil losing millionaires. Okay, kind of interesting. But over here, if you actually look, who has one of the most gains, with the exception of the UAE, which I guess doesn't surprise me. Dubai, right, seems to be like a millionaire haven. If we take Dubai off the ranking here, Australia is number one other than them. We have a plus 3,500 migration, which equates to approximately 80,000 millionaires have moved to Australia over the last 2 decades. That's really weird. New Zealand coming in with some decent numbers as well. So I wonder what the story is behind that. It's very interesting. But yeah, I guess a lot of millionaires are going to the land down under. This map is kind of weird. Length of constitutions in words. So if we look at the UK, 54,000 words. That is a lot, I have to say. A lot of these countries average around maybe like 10 to 15,000. It seems to be a decent number. Brazil coming in with a lot, though, 64,000. South African with 43,000. India taking the cake, 146,000 words. Wow, India's got a true marathon if you want to read their whole constitution. That is crazy. Some of the lower ones like Indonesia, Japan, pretty small, you could say. Saudi Arabia as well. Norway, even the United States, only 7,762 words. Not terribly a lot, and far less than Canada and Mexico, our neighbors. And Australia kind of sitting in the middle, 17,318, a lot more than the U.S., I guess. What about New Zealand? And as you can see, as I asked that, I'm looking on every screen. This is cut off. So we don't get to know New Zealand. Another epic fail, a map that doesn't include New Zealand. What the heck? Now, this is cool. This is the real Star Wars universe. This is countries in which filming took place for the Star Wars movies. So, of course, you have the USA, Mexico, Guatemala, and then over in Ireland, the UK, Iceland, Norway, lots of Europe as well, Switzerland, Croatia, Italy, Spain, even down in Tunisia, Jordan, the UAE, even China, Thailand, the Maldives, Bolivia in South America, and, of course, Australia. None in New Zealand. That's interesting. No, I know some other very famous movies were filmed in New Zealand, of course, but Australia has quite a few movies, but I did not realize, I guess, that Star Wars, at least some of them or one of them, was partly filmed in Australia. If anyone knows, what scenes of what movies were filmed there, please let me know. That sounds very cool. All right, and for this final map, we're looking at the highest temperatures ever recorded. At least 22 countries have recorded maximum temperatures of over 50 C or 122 degrees Fahrenheit or above, which is absolutely insane. The highest temperature I've ever personally felt was last year in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I believe it was like 112 degrees Fahrenheit, and it was super, super freaking hot. Unbelievable. It was like, how are people even outside? Which, to be fair, there wasn't a lot of people outside. If anyone was outside, they were going up in the mountains and where it was only, like 95 degrees. Of course, the sun was really strong up there. I can't imagine feeling anything hotter than that personally, but let's take a look. So in Europe, believe it or not, this was really recent, 2021, Sicily, Italy got up to 48.8 C, which is 119.8 Fahrenheit. That is absolutely wild. You think of Italy having an amazing climate, more of a mild climate, right? Not being really too hot, but it can get hot. And Europe has been getting heat waves as of recent years. That's what I've heard. Then we have Africa and Asia, those continents having similar records, with Tunisia holding Africa's record. 131 Fahrenheit is absolutely ridiculous. That is freaky. And of course, Iran with 129 degrees Fahrenheit or 54 C. Just crazy. Kind of interesting to see Antarctica, Seymour Island, which is at the very tip top, I guess you could say, has gotten up to 20.7 C or 69.3 Fahrenheit. 69 sounds like a nice temperature, not hot at all, right? But I guess that's pretty hot when you think of Antarctica. I mean, usually it's negative temperatures, so I wonder how it got that warm. Pretty interesting. This was also recent in 2020. South America coming in pretty minor, actually. The most minor out of all of these, with the exception of Europe, almost the same, 48.9 C or 120 Fahrenheit, and of course Argentina. So that's kind of interesting. South America being more on the mild side. Then, of course, we have Australia and North America. Now, of course, all these are very interesting. I wonder where they got their source, if these are accurate or if these have been updated. This, of course, the record claims is in Oodnadatta in Australia. Now, this is dead center, like right in the middle of the outback, and they recorded 50.7 C or 123.3 degrees Fahrenheit. That is absolutely nuts. And of course, this was in 1960, so that is really crazy. I mean, I feel like parts of Australia, I've heard from a lot of you guys, gets near this hot all the time. That seems a little low to me, although it might be the record. If you want to dispute that, please let me know in the comments. And then somehow the hottest place on Earth, which is shocking to me, is North America. So that's really weird. I don't know how you can explain it. I don't know, kind of weird. But Death Valley, California, which is way inland here in the Mojave Desert, has reached 56.7 C or 134 degrees Fahrenheit in 1913. I know recently, I think a couple years ago, I remember it hit 132 degrees Fahrenheit there. So it's still really hot. That is absolutely insanity. And I do have to admit, I don't know how it works. It's very weird how our Southwest here in the United States, all these southwestern desert states do get very, very hot. Even Texas gets very, very hot. I don't really know why. So I guess that's the hottest place on Earth, Death Valley, or I would say just the greater Southwest region. Wow, really weird, right? That's going to do it for this one, guys. I really hope you enjoyed looking at these interesting maps of Australia and kind of the world. We kind of mixed a lot in there. I really always have fun with these. It's been a while since we did one of these, so please leave me your comments down below. Or if you would like to add to any of these facts or what you thought maybe was a little inaccurate here, I'd love to hear about your thoughts down below. Please throw a thumbs up on there, of course, if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to be part of this amazing community. Lots of awesome stuff coming, so stay tuned for that. My name is Ian. You're watching IWrocker. Until next time, y'all. I'll catch you later.